Theory, The Basics, presented by Kinsey Carroll, Antonio Rivera, Callie Royal, and Jenna Sato. In this presentation, we will briefly review the definition of narrative theory, its practice principles, explain which clinical settings and client population would benefit from this theory, as well as its strengths and limitations. In order to explain what narrative theory is, we must first understand narratives. A narrative is a story that describes a life experience. Narrative theory suggests that the way the individuals identify is shown through the stories that they tell about their life, those around them, and the world that they exist in. When clinical social workers apply this theory to practice, the goal is to listen to how the client is telling their story, how the client is negatively perceiving the said story, then help the client rewrite their story in a more positive and constructive way. The first principle of narrative theory is that storytelling is a way for people to express or communicate their lives through work, writing, and physical art. Social workers should pay attention to the client's stories because it allows them to give more detail and information. The second principle is how the client tells the story and the meaning of it to them. By allowing clients to share their stories, the social worker can get a better understanding of what the events mean to the client and how they interpret it. The third principle of this theory is very important. As clinicians, it is helpful to hear the story, but it is even more helpful to the client to be able to process the event by expressing it verbally or physically through writing or art. As the client continues to tell and retell the story, this may help them to interpret the story differently. Lastly, the fourth principle is about helping the client externalize their story. Theorists believe that our society has taught us to internalize everything negative and bad. Consequently, this leads clients to bury any negative experiences. By encouraging clients to openly express their stories, social workers can help clients view the story from a more positive perspective. Narrative theory has many strengths. First, the theory can be employed across a variety of clients and settings. Since clients are setting their story from their perspective, the approach is appropriate with different ethnicities, age groups, challenges, and treatment settings. The theory acknowledges the effect of social constructionism on cultural and social norms such as expectations, oppression, discrimination, and prejudice. Thus, the theory is applicable and effective for diverse groups. Additionally, the theory has been used in macro, meso, and micro social work. The theory is appropriate for individuals, families, and groups to help the clients as well as help the social worker gain a better understanding of their challenges and perspective because they are able to hear their perspective of the issue and the meaning they ascribe to it. Additionally, social workers can employ the individuals' and groups' narratives to change social policy and social issues at the macro level. They can advocate to officials, professionals, and the greater society by using the stories of their clients. Furthermore, the narrative theory can be beneficial in qualitative research. Because it is based on the subject telling about their story from their perspective, the researcher gains deeper understanding of the subject's experience along with the meaning and emotions that experience provokes. Researchers can also employ the theory with diverse subjects due to the approach being appropriate for different ethnicities. Next, the theory is beneficial in managed care because it can be a brief treatment that typically lasts 7 to 8 months or sessions. In narrative theory, the client is the expert in the story and experience. This empowers the client and levels the playing field between the client and the clinician. They also are an active participant in their treatment. The approach also enables the client to develop a new perspective and meaning of their experience. They can see their experience in a more positive light as the strength and opportunity. Telling their story may also gain access to suppressed thoughts about the experience that they may not have realized they had. In addition, the theory is strength-based. The goal is not based on diagnosing the problem, but creating a new perspective on the client's experience. Finally, the narrative theory can develop a strong therapeutic alliance. As the client tells their story, the social worker is able to affirm, note strengths, employ active listening, and show empathy to the client, and thus strengthen the client-clinician relationship. Even though there are many strengths of narrative theory, there are also some limitations. The field of social work has become focused on evidence-based practice, developing and using treatments with empirical support. Studies conducted on narrative theory are often smaller qualitative studies resulting in relatively thin evidence. The main goal of these studies is to evaluate the theory's usefulness. These types of studies are consistent with the underlying philosophy of narrative theory. Because of this, the supporting evidence of narrative theory is discredited by leaders of evidence-based practice. Narrative theorists disprove the process of labeling, which occurs when using the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, also known as the DSM. This is challenging for settings that require diagnosis, such as the medical and managed care settings. It is believed that narrative theory is not a good fit for these settings due to the lack of diagnosis, which prevents labeling. Narrative theory also does not work well with social practices that require deterministic processes. People's narratives differ in type and purpose, including family, cultural, individual or personal, community, organizational, and life narratives. This is critical to remember when working with diverse client systems. The practitioner should also remain aware of how often times being marginalized may reinforce beliefs and values which may change or suppress the client's true narrative. When working with a client on opening up regarding their narrative, the practitioner needs to help the client move from feeling marginalized to being respected before the full narrative may come to light. Since the narrative theory involves the client telling their story, the practitioner must be aware of those from backgrounds which differ from the practitioners, will likely have varying narratives. The practitioner should also have a solid foundation in understanding different cultures and backgrounds, particularly those that are prevalent in his or her client base. The practitioner should also be open to asking the client to elaborate on important cultural factors which may influence their narrative. For example, when working in Arizona, it would be important for a practitioner to have a solid understanding of Native American culture and how the beliefs of the particular tribe the client belongs to may not only affect their narrative, but also how they share their story and what pieces they may not feel comfortable about opening up. Finally, when using the narrative theory, the practitioner must continue to remember that effective listening is key, and often there may be times when we should stop note-taking and just listen. When working with a variety of clients, the practitioner should take notes on how the client's culture may view note-taking versus effective listening. The practitioner should again have enough information about the client's background that they ensure the client feels respected at all times. For example, if a practitioner is young and using a computer or electronics to take notes and the client is older, they may feel disrespected when telling their narrative if the practitioner is typing during the entire narrative, as they may be more comfortable with direct eye contact and knowing that practitioner's full attention is on the narrative. In conclusion, narrative theory suggests that the way the individual identity is shown through the stories that they tell about their life, those around them, and the world that they exist in. The goal of narrative theory can be explained through its 4 practice principles. Narrative theory has many strengths as well as limitations. This theory can be used on a variety of clients as well as settings. As studies conducted on narrative theory are typically small and qualitative, the relatively thin supporting evidence is often discredited by evidence-based practice. Narrative theory is applicable to a diverse client system because people's narratives differ in type and purpose, including family, cultural, and individual or personal, community, organizational, and life narratives. Narrative theory is a great way to create a therapeutic alliance with clients, all while supporting them and being able to openly tell their story can help the client view his or her story in a more positive way.